Bon matin et bonjour, bienvenue en ce beau mercredi matin et deuxième journée de programmation chez MTL Connect. Comment allez-vous ce matin? Ah, madame est comme bof, pas si bien, ça va. Vous vous êtes rendus déjà, il est 9 heures. Wow, la classe de lève-tôt. Je suis content de vous voir quand même en si grand nombre ce matin. Merci d'être ici. Mon nom est Armand Afkami, votre animateur pour cette troisième journée chez MTL Connect de la société Kelvin Zero. Un plaisir d'être ici avec vous. My name's Armand Afkami from Kelvin Zero. What a pleasure to be your MC today and for the rest of the week, actually all the way till tomorrow night at the end of MTL Connect. Alors, MTL Connect, la semaine numérique de Montréal. Bonjour aux internautes qui nous rejoignent de partout à travers le monde. Merci d'être ici virtuellement. Bien, aussi, évidemment, merci à vous tous d'être ici avec nous au magnifique Studio 2 dans l'édifice des 7 doigts de la main. C'est très beau ici, non? Oui. Ah, encore bof, ça va. J'ai déjà vu mieux. Belle moustache, monsieur. J'aime votre très belle moustache. Alors, je suis content d'être ici et de partir les deux belles thématiques de la journée. Nous allons parler de cybersécurité et également de technologies disruptives. Mais pour ce premier segment dans le Studio 2, nous allons parler de cybersécurité et nous avons notre Keynote que je suis très excité de vous présenter. Alors, juste rapidement, on aimerait remercier nos partenaires, le gouvernement du Québec et la Ville de Montréal et évidemment tous les autres partenaires qui nous permettent d'être ici et de vous offrir cette belle programmation. So today's programming, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and disruptive tech all through the day in the different venues, so Studio de Danse downstairs and in the Studio 2, which we are in now. And we're going to start with our keynote in cybersecurity, and I'm so excited to present her to you all. Okay, so, and like I said in French, I'd like to thank our partners without whom we wouldn't be able to have an event like MTL Connect. The support of the government of Quebec and the city of Montreal is crucial, as well as all of the other partners that have made a day like today possible. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote. She will be talking about securing the future. And she's the CISO at Mambu, a SaaS cloud banking platform. She has over 23 years experience leading and advising international organizations in cyber and tech. All the way from London, please give it up for Bronwyn Boyle. Thank you, Bronwyn.
Merci, Armand.
Merci.
Bonjour. Bonjour, bon matin tout le monde et merci beaucoup pour l'invitation de venir ici aujourd'hui. And that is about all the French I can speak, so I'll quit while I'm ahead. But thank you very, very much for the invitation to join you for such an incredible conference in such an amazing space. I've just arrived today in this theatre, and it's absolutely fascinating to see a space that is a circus space, and how appropriate for a conference that is taking such a holistic view of how technology and digital innovation is impacting so many facets of our lives. So, as Armand has kindly introduced me, my name is Bronwyn Boyle, originally from Dublin, Ireland, now based in London in the UK. And as Armand says, I am the Chief Information Security Officer at a company called Mambu. As he says, we're a SaaS banking service, cloud service as a platform provider. And one of the reasons I was really, really pleased to join here is that when the organisers asked me would I be interested in attending, they said they were interested in finding somebody who is interested in cybersecurity and also philosophy. Now, my original studies were in philosophy and classical studies, so I've kind of gone from Plato to CISO. And it's fair to say I don't often get a chance to kind of bring those two aspects of my life together. I'm more often working in the field of financial services with a range of different banking organizations around the globe. So it's not often, as I say, I get the chance to kind of hark back to my original roots. And of course, I jumped at the chance. It was interesting because I think if we think about cybersecurity and ancient civilization and philosophy, those two probably don't naturally seem to go hand in hand. But in fact, there are actually quite a few parallels. How so? Well, first of all, relativism. So many strands of philosophy assert that there is no such thing as absolute truth. And in a similar way, in cybersecurity, there is no such thing as 100% security, which is a bit of a bummer, but there we have it. There are always going to be vulnerabilities. There are always going to be gaps. There is always going to be human error, human bias, human emotion that can be exploited in our systems and that can be taken advantage of. So despite all of our hard work, we have to acknowledge that cyber breaches can and do happen. And I think we have to take a bit of a philosophical approach to kind of understand that those breaches, when they do happen, they need to have resilience and response. Secondly, impact. So, okay, many of the modern social and philosophical structures that we depend on today actually hark back thousands of years to ancient philosophy. So be that kind of Confucian altruism, be that Socratic questioning, be that the Platonic search of justice, they still permeate our lives. And similarly, okay, cybersecurity is a slightly newer discipline. We've got probably 50 years on the clock as opposed to thousands of years of philosophy. But cybersecurity really does impact every element of our lives. And again, I think that's where the cohesive nature of what we're discussing today at MTL Connect really demonstrates how cybersecurity does interweave across those domains. Also, for each one of us, right, we spend around 7 hours every day online. That's a huge proportion of our lives. It adds up to about 21 years when you add it up over an average lifespan. So with that level of pervasiveness of our online engagement, it really does demand that we question how we interact online, that we take a philosophical approach to how we interact in the digital space and how that cybersecurity element can then help us better understand and make choices about how we engage with technology. And finally, ethics. So just as philosophical frameworks can give us an ethical construct in which to better understand ourselves, our relationship to society, and our relationships with each other, so cybersecurity can be an interesting lens and mirror on the ethics of online interaction. We live in a world of unprecedented connectivity, but that's also coupled with online anonymity, and that can lead to various interesting forces that buffet us every day when we are online. So it's a really interesting opportunity, again, to take that philosophical approach to cybersecurity, to question what is being presented to us every day, and to question the ethics of how we are interacting online. And the better we can understand those forces, the better we can then understand how to counterbalance those. So I thought today, to structure the discussion, the agenda for MTL Connect is such a wonderful, holistic and cohesive exploration of digital technology. I thought I would look at the similar domains and themes with a cybersecurity lens to assess how cybersecurity innovations, changes in techniques and threat actors, and changes in vulnerabilities are impacting us and our everyday lives. So not often you might have a cybersecurity and philosophy mashup, but this is what we're going for. Excellent. So let's start with disruptive innovation. As I mentioned, so I work for Mambu. We are a cloud banking platform. So that essentially means that we host and provide core banking services that our end customers can utilize as a subscription, as a license model, and then they can focus on creating amazing financial experiences for their end customers, so the likes of you and me. And in fact, we're now living in this anything as a service model. So essentially, in the older days, when you had to kind of bring a product to market, you'd typically have to kind of develop it and maintain it yourself. You would have to host it. You would have a whole load of complexity and maintenance overheads. Now you can just purchase it via cloud-based service, radically reducing your cost of entry, radically increasing and accelerating your time to market. And this diagram here gives us a few examples of just how this anything as a service model is impacting our lives. So again, in the days of yore, you would have to host your own email exchange servers. Not anymore. There's Office 365 running in the cloud that takes all of that burden away from you. Likewise, I don't need a hi-fi anymore. I don't need a TV anymore. I use, Spotify and Netflix as streaming services to access those services on demand. And, goodbye expensive car insurance, no more looking for that elusive car park space. I can just use the likes of Zipcar and Lyft. So interestingly, just as that anything as a service business model has radically changed our own lives, it's also done quite a bit to revolutionize the cybersecurity industry, mainly because cybercriminals are actually adopting this same model. The actual concept of cybercrime as a service is now becoming very prevalent. And what it means is that cybercriminals don't have to be particularly motivated or skilled anymore. They can simply buy cybercrime exploits on the dark web, paid by cryptocurrency, and off they go. And essentially, again, that just means the barrier to entry is very low. A good example is ransomware as a service. This is a bit of a schematic of how that works. So what happens is you've got a kind of a skilled hacker, a ransomware developer. They badge that up into a nice, neatly packaged service, put it for sale on the dark web, and then what happens is affiliates, which are the people who want to launch the ransomware, they essentially buy that service, they attack their victims, and then the developer gets a cut of any ransom that's actually paid through those victims through that ransomware as a service model. So it's estimated that about 2/3 of ransomware attacks are actually serviced via this type of ransomware as a service crime model. And more than, like for individuals and for small businesses, they fall victim to a ransomware attack up to every 11 seconds. Now, that is a really scary statistic, and it's something that the UK government to call ransomware a national threat to security. There's no doubt about it that it's a very troubling and very worrying trend. And as I said, the ubiquity now of these sort of services is making the landscape a lot more difficult to defend from. There are other models as well. So distributed denial of service attacks. You may well be familiar with those. It's where botnets of connected and exploited devices are used, interconnected together, to take down the victim's service by flooding it with fake traffic. Well, we now have DDoS as a service, which means, again, that you can pay to use these compromised botnets to attack the victim of your choice, just on demand, essentially. Likewise with phishing on a service. So for phishing attacks, again, when you're receiving an email that's trying to lure you into sharing credentials or opening dodgy attachments, clicking on links, again, you can now buy that service off the dark web. You can buy full lists of target email addresses, your or my email address, along with templates of the companies that you're looking to impersonate. So there's a really kind of high-grade sophistication that is now available at scale. And one really interesting corollary of that is that many of these crimeware as a service options now have better customer service than legitimate software offerings. So this is an example here from a ransomware as a service provider. It's their chat service. They're helpfully talking a ransomware victim through how to pay the ransom, how to get access to the decryption key. Lots of help facilities, very well thought through. And another example here is from a phishing as a service provider. And they very helpfully offer you a 10% discount if you sign up to their newsletter. So very interesting to see these kind of, very corporate types of promotional and PR and kind of customer support models now infiltrating into the cybercrime space. And with that, I think, the plus side, it is worrying, I guess, to see this sort of trend. It's worrying to think about the implications of, the ubiquity and the availability of these tools of harm. But I suppose what is more positive is the organization element is now really hitting the radars of folks who can try and do something about it. So we've got the likes of Europol, the likes of the World Economic Forum, companies like the Cyber Defence Alliance, who I work closely with in the UK, are all really working hard along with public and private sector organizations to try and disrupt these criminal gangs and try and take them down. And indeed, there has been, some really good success this year. We've seen disruption of a number of major ransomware as a service gangs, including Clop and Revil there. And we've also seen disruption of DDoS as a service infrastructure. So it's not all doom and gloom. We are seeing kind of positive steps to try and countervail and counteract those threats. So let's move on to one of the other topics that we're talking through in more depth across the span of today's conference. Artificial intelligence. It's no doubt it's been one of the biggest disruptive innovations of recent years, and it's been fantastic considering all of the great benefits that it's bringing to us as a society. So from things like, improved medical imaging and diagnostics, self-driving cars, better environmental response and interaction, there's a huge amount, as I said, of benefits that it's conveying. But AI is very much a double-edged sword. So just as it can be used for good, it can also be used in quite a negative connotation. And again, one of the areas where AI is causing a lot of issues is in, again, the world of cybercrime. Interestingly, it wasn't really considered to be much of a threat. And again, the reason was to actually use artificial intelligence takes quite a lot of upfront investment, right? You need to develop your algorithm, you need to have access to data to train it, you need to kind of keep numerous iterations for it to actually start learning and predicting the right outcomes. And again, all of that was a barrier to entry for cybercriminals. Not anymore. We have AI as a service. And again, just in a similar way, this is radically disrupting the models that cybercriminals are choosing to use. So we'll explore a couple of angles there just in terms of deepfakes. And again, I know if you were here yesterday, there was some really interesting presentations from the folks at Deep Media on deepfakes of the future. I think it's interesting to think about how these deepfakes now are permeating our society. So one example, in January 2020, in the United Arab Emirates, there was a $35 million bank heist that was precipitated through the medium of a voice deepfake. So essentially what happened, bank manager receives a call from somebody they know, somebody that they've worked with for many years as a customer of the bank. They're an executive at a company. They say they need to do a series of high-value transfers. No problem, recognize the voice, and at the same time, the bank manager is receiving emails authorizing the transactions. Now, what the bank manager did not realize was that those emails were forged and fraudulent, and that voice was not the real individual. It was actually a deep fake of their voice. And the technology, the deepfake as a service tech, is actually available now quite readily online. You need as little as 1 minute of someone's voice to be able to make a very compelling recording that can fool people again into believing that they're talking to somebody else. Also, deepfake videos. So this is going to be probably one of our biggest present cyber threats in the coming years. This is a deepfake of Bruce Willis. He appeared in a Russian telecom ad last year, and you may have seen, he's retiring from acting, but there's been rumors that he's going to sell his deepfake avatar to a company so he can continue to earn as an actor even as he's retired. There's no doubt about it, again, these deepfake videos are very, very difficult to spot. The technology that's available is, again, it's improving every day. And there are some telltale signs. So one apparent sign is that deepfakes are not very good at doing wrinkles. And I don't know about you, but Bruce is looking very smooth of face in that one. And there are other signs as well, like, you may see the subject not blinking as much or blinking too much. Apparently, they're not very good at rendering facial hair just yet. So there is a little bit of a depth in terms of perception that might help us with awareness and might help us to identify a deepfake if we come across one. But the flip side is, again, the tech is improving every day. And the likelihood of actually this retaining kind of some level of like humanly identifiable, differentiators is very low. So this was the deepfake that was released of the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky early in March, the Russian conflict, where basically he was urging the Ukrainian troops to lay down their arms and surrender. Obviously not true. But it was very highly shared on Facebook, so Facebook were forced to intervene. This is also one of an interesting first examples of the commercial exploitation of deepfakes. So this was the chief commercial officer of Binance, the crypto trading platform, who essentially said he had a deepfake of his image that was put into a Zoom call with a number of crypto investors who were partnering with Binance. And basically, the deepfake was looking to exploit their knowledge, tap into their crypto investments, etc. So very interesting to see it's already being exploited by cyber criminals. I really like this point. They said it was very accurate, except that the deepfake hadn't accounted for the £15 he put on during the lockdown. So there's another little telltale opportunity for us to identify. So there is a lot of work going on, obviously, to counterbalance, again, these forces. So on the left-hand side there, you can see Microsoft's authenticator service, visual authenticator, and essentially what it does is it assesses those images and it gives you a percentage chance that they have been manipulated. So you can verify and validate whether there's been any tampering or any intervention with video content. Likewise, on the right, Reality Defender, again, it uses data manipulation algorithms, again, to kind of get a source of a sense of whether an image may have been integrated or not. But again, as I mentioned, the technology is changing all the time. And, this is the TikTok deepfake Tom Cruise, which is created by a Belgian artist. He just puts up Tom Cruise doing random stuff around the house and eating lollipops. And what he has predicted is that by 2025, our current deepfake capabilities will be superseded by a snapshot filter, right? So the idea of this technology being very prevalent, being very sophisticated, and being readily available is imminent. And one of the things that's fueling this is a lot of the stuff that we see in TikTok where we do face swaps or we do lip syncing. All of that is actually training algorithms that can be used for this type of criminal exploitation. So a lot happening there. And from an artificial intelligence perspective as well, it's not just the application of AI we need to worry about. The actual way artificial intelligence and machine learning operates and learns can also be rendered vulnerable to bad actors. This is an example of a data poisoning attack, and it's a really insidious way of working, right? So instead of attacking from the outside in, attackers look to corrupt or influence the underlying data sets that machine learning is trained on. So it may be looking at a massive data set with some information there, which then is injected with something malicious that will influence the output. Or another example is many machine learning algorithms are trained on user feedback and user content. And again, bad actors are looking to disrupt that and to inject information at different kind of points to influence the outcome. You might remember Tay. This was Microsoft's somewhat ill-fated chatbot that was released in 2016. Tay was designed to appeal to girls and women of 18 to 24 and was designed to respond and learn based on user feedback. Well, it is fair to say it did not go very well. Within about 24 hours, Tay was spewing out really offensive, really racist, sexist, awful comments, right? Because it was being fed by the public. The public realized they could have a little bit of a prank with it. And it was kind of, a genocidal maniac within 24 hours. So it had to be shut down. And again, that's a bit of a kind of a humorous example. But since then, we have seen other applications that are kind of worrying. So this 3D turtle here managed to fool Google's algorithmic identification of images into thinking it was a rifle. Obviously, some worrying connotations there for defense. Likewise, Virus Total, which is Google's virus scanning, this is a real worry, has been tricked into thinking benign files were malware and therefore blocking them, but also more worryingly was fooled to actually ignore malware that was being scanned due to the tampering of the heuristics and the poisoning of underlying data. And another element as well, Tesla's automatic cars ended up driving on the wrong side of the road as a result of manipulating how the road markings were being interpreted. So there's no doubt about it, the data poisoning threat is a real worry and a real cause of concern. It's something that's called a ticking time bomb, mainly because right now, companies are more concerned around getting their AI up and running and getting it working than they are in terms of spending the time to verify and validate the integrity of the data that they're using to actually train those algorithms. So it's a little bit of a wait and see. We have no way of knowing whether there's been anything nefarious going on, but it is something we are going to have to watch out for. That concept of what they call adversarial machine learning is something that we are going to need to keep a very close watch on over the coming years. So next, culture and creativity. Really, really wonderful, again, to explore over NCL Connect the different ways technology is impacting our cultural landscape. We've seen elements of the metaverse completely changing our cultural frontiers. We've seen the likes of new NFTs allowing a new way for artists and creative expression to generate new revenue streams and whole new types of art, which is fantastic. And again, obviously, the prevalence of cryptocurrency has completely changed the paradigm for kind of payment and remuneration, particularly in the NFT piece, where now artists are given an ongoing royalty when their artwork is traded on further down the line, which is great. I think it is also fair to say that there are maybe some skeptics out there who are questioning the long-term viability of some of these innovations. So there's been an interesting question around one of the metaverse companies up in the top left-hand corner there. It's got over $1 billion market cap, but in the recent reports have said it's got as few as 30 active users a day, which is quite low, obviously, and it might cast some doubt on its long-term popularity or longevity. Likewise, with NFTs, you can see the prices have massively plummeted since its heyday last summer. So there is a bit of an open question into how sustainable these new cultural frontiers will be in our lives. But what is under no doubt is that they have already massively changed, again, our cybersecurity landscape, and they've opened up, new avenues for fraudsters to exploit. So take, for example, the hyperverse. This was touted as the new frontier of online events. It was an entirely metaverse-driven concert and event company where you could pay for concert tickets that would be held exclusively in the metaverse, again, using crypto. And the idea would be that artists would have exclusive performances and release exclusive content through the medium of the metaverse. Except, again, despite this being very highly publicized, not only in the metaverse, but also actually in traditional media, there's no evidence that any of those concerts ever took place. So again, it's just demonstrating there's a lot of kind of hype, there's a lot of kind of potential scam potential going on in the metaverse. And we've also seen other kind of less positive activities. So we've seen examples of metaverse cyber assaults. We've seen examples of corporate impersonation and identity theft. So a lot of new types of worry that need to be translated and thought about in that environment. And likewise also, the way we interact on the metaverse is generating a whole new type of data that could be very interesting to surveillance capitalism. The use of virtual reality headsets is creating this entirely new data set called pupillometry, where it's tracking our eye movements. And that's probably very interesting data for a variety of reasons, one of which could be for cyber adversaries looking to get past biometric authentication mechanisms. So a lot to worry about there. And I think the other element to think about as well is the NFT element. So there are a lot of examples, again, where artists are getting ripped off. Their work is being repurposed and somebody unscrupulous is just lifting the artwork, creating and minting an NFT, and then seeking to basically pass that work down on an onward trading chain to get the ongoing royalties. And in fact, OpenSea, which is the main trader of NFT artwork, self-reported this year that over 80% of the content minted on its platform was either plagiarized or a fake. Now, that is a huge statistic, and again, there's an awful lot of money behind that statistic, and I think, again, indicates that we need to be a little bit skeptical about kind of what we're seeing in that new online world and make sure that we're doing our due diligence, I guess. It's a little bit of a Wild West, it's a little bit of a new frontier, and I think there's an element where we need to kind of proceed with caution until we kind of catch up with some of the security. Another example of the security, again, with OpenSea, so they have had a number of data breaches. They've also seen some insider trading, and they've seen security vulnerabilities exploited to buy NFTs at knockdown rates, again, defrauding the individual who originally owned the work. So lots to think about. It's a very exciting and exhilarating kind of new domain, but we do need to be cautious and mindful about how it's impacting us. And again, I think from a cultural perspective as well, there's a degree to where we want to also think about how our cultural philosophy and approach can be kind of co-opted in these new domains and these new ways of expressing ourselves. You might have heard of Dr. Ruja Ignatova. She's also known as the crypto queen. Now, I find her story fascinating, right, because I work in security, and I was amazed that I hadn't heard of her before last year, because she's a very renowned woman. She founded a cryptocurrency called OneCoin, And the idea of OneCoin was that it was very much touted as a family. It was touted as a kind of a community-driven crypto scheme that would allow kind of much more inclusion on financial well-being, and that would really kind of drive more of a family approach. And it would also importantly give folks who maybe had missed the Bitcoin wave a second bite of the cherry, right? So for the people who kind of didn't get on the Bitcoin ladder early and felt like they were missing out, she was positioning OneCoin as the Bitcoin killer, that anybody joining could profit from. And she went around the world doing stadium gigs. Like she spoke to 90,000 people at Wembley. It was more nearly like a cult than a crypto scheme. Huge devotees, people selling their life savings and putting them in. Farmers in Ghana selling the farm and investing in OneCoin. And the problem was it didn't exist. There was actually no cryptocurrency at all. The whole thing was a multi-level marketing scheme, a Ponzi scam. She disappeared in 2017 with $4 billion. Now that is a huge amount of money. No one knows where it is, no one knows where she is, but obviously has left a swathe of devastation in her wake. And I think the really interesting thing for me is that's the biggest crypto scam in history. And I was like, how have I not heard of this? How am I only finding out kind of in 2021? And again, I think it shows you that a lot of this stuff, it kind of happens in between existing regulations. It falls through the cracks. Right now, the crypto market is catching up with regulation, but there's still plenty of hiding room, shall we say, for bad actors. And likewise, I think it also shows, these types of global scam, they can get shut down in one country and then move to another. So it's often quite easy to just kind of keep playing that forward. And indeed, even when it was announced that it was a scam, some of the dedicated believers were still saying, no, we're not believing the haters, we still believe, and they were still investing, right? So I think you can probably still buy some OneCoin somewhere. I wouldn't advise you do that, but if you're interested. Anyway, so yeah, I think all of this shows us again, the kind of culture wars, I guess, can be co-opted by bad actors who are kind of less scrupulous. And for me, I think particularly for people who've lost trust in traditional institutions, there's a lot of bad faith around financial institutions. There's a lot of people who are feeling disenfranchised, and they can be actually quite easy prey to some of the riches on offer and the philosophies on offer, indeed, through these types of scam. So let's move on to our next topic, smart cities. Again, we've been really interested in exploring how smart cities are changing our lives for the better. They're adding an awful lot of value in terms of what they're giving us for better predicted mobility, better use of energy resources and utilities, improved waste management, improved safety, all of that good stuff. But they're also really introducing new types of risk, and that risk is kind of probably seen from two lenses. One is around the data aggregation piece, and the other is around the infrastructure piece. So we'll look at those two individually. So the point of smart cities is there's a huge amount of data being collected from city infrastructure, smart sensors, traffic lights, utility readers, all of that good stuff. And that data then is being combined with information on us, the citizens living in the smart cities, our day-to-day activities, how we're interacting and engaging with some of those technologies within our socio-physical world. And all of that is being brought together into one huge data lake, which is a treasure trove, as you can imagine, for anybody who's seeking to either exploit that type of volume of data, but also look at kind of novel ways of potentially disrupting it. And again, so just as an example, we're kind of seeing a little bit of the types of ramification that could happen if smart city data got hacked through observing what recently happened in Australia with the Optus breach. So that was a couple of months ago, Optus, biggest telco provider in Australia. The information of 10 million Australian citizens, that's 40% of the country, was exposed in a relatively unsophisticated hack. And again, I think the scale of that attack has been a really stark foreshadowing of what can happen when smart cities go wrong, and that volume of data has been breached. The data included people's medical insurance details, it included people's passports, it included a huge array of very sensitive information that really demonstrates the threat of identity theft could be very real in the future. And again, the impacts were really devastating. So vulnerable people couldn't get access to essential online government services. They couldn't access their benefits. They couldn't, interact with government websites. They all had to go and change their passports. And of course, that demand then caused its own problems. And as always, opportunistic cybercriminals, of course, were just waiting in the wings to jump on that crisis as a mechanism for more types of phishing and scams. So they were impersonating, for instance, Equifax, the credit protection agency, who were there to make sure that they could try and do some monitoring of identity theft. Of course, bad guys will always swoop in when they see that type of chaos, and they will look to exploit it for their own gain. So pretty worrying corollary there for what might happen if smart city data gets breached. And likewise on the infrastructure side. So we know, what's that up there? I can't see, I'm blind. Anyway, something about that is going to be relevant. Back in 2008 in Poland, a teen hacked the rail infrastructure and managed to derail a train, causing widespread damage and lots of injuries and kind of personal impact. That was in 2008. Things have got an awful lot more sophisticated since then. So we've seen really quite deleterious effects on a number of different types of smart city infrastructure. We saw the ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline in the US, disrupting the water supply. We've seen attacks on other water supplies, changing the levels of sodium hyphosphate in the water up to dangerous levels. We've seen attacks on food supply chains, hospitals, critical infrastructure. And again, obviously today's tragic news in the Ukraine with Russia targeting critical infrastructure. They've been targeting critical infrastructure in a cyber war, for many months now. So they've already had quite a number of attacks on Ukrainian government websites and on energy grids. So it is very worrying about kind of thinking about what can happen when smart cities become vulnerable. And I think one of the reasons it's such a tricky problem for us to solve is that many of the underlying systems that power smart cities were never designed to be interacted with online. They were designed to be protected in a very, very secure and ring-fenced environment, physically secured, very much self-contained. But we've now wrapped around them other systems that are exposing them to the internet and are exposing a whole new type of attack surface that we don't even fully really understand the implications of just yet. So it's very, very much something that we need to think about. And likewise, we also need to think about what the governments are doing to try and kind of improve the situation. This was a report that the Irish government released that was examining some of the technology used in smart cities to assess it for its kind of stability and its scalability and its robustness. And really, really worrying comment there. They said they were buggy, brittle, and hackable. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not a very reassuring premise to think about in terms of our baseline security for many of the systems that are powering our smart cities today. We really need to kind of think about how we can improve that position. And that's at the macro level. What about the micro level? So many of us are now living in smart homes. So we have a range of different devices in our homes that can tell us when we need to change the temperature or open the door or, order some milk or whatever. And again, all of those are often Internet of Things devices that can be poorly secured, that can be easily hacked. And again, with some kind of quite creepy examples of kind of where this has gone wrong. So, for example, Google's Ring system. There's been really, really unpleasant instances where people have hacked into the systems. They've had weird, creepy voices coming out of baby monitors. They've changed, played offensive music in people's houses. They've changed the heating up to 90 degrees, costing people a lot of money in today's economic times with energy crisis the way it is. So it's really interesting to see how, that sense of violation, like when somebody's actually interfering with your home and how that operates. It's a whole new type of kind of icky feeling that can happen. And likewise also Amazon Ring, so that's Google Nest, but Amazon's Ring is also being subject to a number of class action lawsuits at the moment, again, because the allegation is that they've had insufficient security and again, that people have been the victim of these sorts of kind of creepy types of hack. So a lot to think about there. And again, I think one of the reasons why we're kind of vulnerable in our homes is because there's inherently insecure IT devices, but we're also not helping ourselves, right? So many of us are still using Wi-Fi passwords that are default settings. We haven't changed them to be kind of complex or unique. You know, we're not taking the basic measures and basic hygiene principles that would make attackers' lives difficult. So we have to think about the onus being on us. And we have to kind of see what we can do as well as kind of online citizens and part of the digital world to try and improve that situation and make things harder for bad actors. And it's great to see now, you know, governments are really focusing on making more accessible education for people. So it can be a bit bamboozling. I mean, I know certainly talking to my mum about how to change her router password and all of this, it can be very, very kind of discombobulating for folks who are less kind of tech savvy or tech comfortable. But there's an awful lot of time and investment now going into kind of providing different types of learning, much more accessible content to just help us take those steps day to day that can make things a little bit more difficult for attackers and also can make us feel a lot more empowered. So that's the end of the smart cities. I'm now going to move on to the idea of education and the future of work. So I have very good news for anybody who would like a career in cybersecurity. There is 0% unemployment in the cybersecurity field right now. So anybody who's thinking about a career change, you will be welcomed with open arms. And it's quite interesting, like there are some really, really worrying stats again here around just how much this demand in the workforce is increasing. There's expected to be 3.5 million unfilled cyber jobs by 2025. Now, if that isn't a good call to arms for people to retrain, I don't know what is. But we do need to kind of have a think about what is driving that demand. And I think there's a number of different factors that we need to consider. One is that essentially now every business is a digital business, right? So most businesses have some level of an online component, and that is warranting that they have the right level of cyber skills to help protect their businesses and help support them. Likewise, we're no longer confined to the four walls of our offices, right? Many of us are working from home. We're also working with, again, cloud-based systems that have kind of broken down the traditional idea of the perimeter. And, you know, I think all of that has, again, led to a very, very strong pipeline of demand and an awful lot of demand for increasing and developing tech skills. So the pace of change in technology, as we're learning over the course of this conference, it's relentless, right? It changes so much, so quickly. So there's a lot that we need to do to keep pace with that and to retrain. Then we also need to think about the supply side. We're not doing very well with some of the supply side, mainly sometimes because job hirers can be unrealistic, right? So here's an example of a job for looking for somebody with cybersecurity skills, and they're asking for 12 years experience in a technology that's only been around for 6, right? So we're not doing very well here. We need to do better. We need to be much more targeted around what we're looking for and what's feasible. The other thing that hirers are doing, which can be a really deleterious barrier to entry, they're demanding that you need really expensive or costly certs, right? So you need like CISP or kind of, you know, an MSc or all this stuff. And that can be a huge barrier to entry from people from different socioeconomic backgrounds who would otherwise be a fantastic addition to the field. And likewise also, I think some of them, again, are impractical, right? So I've seen other job ads say you need CISP certification as an entry-level job, but you'll only get that certification if you can demonstrate that you've had 5 years' experience, right? So again, there's an imbalance here, there's a lack of awareness, and we're not really helping ourselves. Another element is that, you know, we do have a bit of a diversity problem still. It's getting better, which is great, but we have a long way to go before we are a fully representative and inclusive cybersecurity workforce. I was really excited last few months where Mambu, my company, was named in the Forbes top 100 cloud companies, which was great. I was less happy when they did a bit of follow-up analysis and they said that only 4 of those companies have a female security exec, right? So there's still a lot of underrepresentation for women in the field. There's a huge amount of underrepresented, disproportionately so for minority populations. So only 3% of US InfoSec analysts are black, for instance. So we have to do better. We have a long way to go before we can have a fully inclusive, fully representative population of thriving cybersecurity folks from all walks of life that are representing us, the population they're protecting, and are also representing the diversity of the adversaries who are looking to attack us. So again, a lot to do there. One thing to think about as well, burnout is a very, very real issue in cybersecurity these days. So there's a lot of pressure on cybersecurity analysts, particularly those who are involved in incident response. You know, I call myself the chief worry officer, right? Because basically you're just constantly kind of worrying about bad stuff happening that you have no control over. And I think particularly for folks who are working in security operations, they can get very fatigued and very burnt out. And I think, again, this has been kind of something quite heartening over the last few years where we've seen a real step change in the openness to talk about mental health in the cybersecurity profession. We're seeing more cybersecurity mental health first aiders now who are being much more proactive about kind of keeping a temperature check on folks and checking in to see how they're doing. And it's a much more, again, inclusive environment. And again, nowhere has that type of kind of collaboration and care been seen as starkly, for me, certainly in my history, than in Log4j. Now, if you don't know what Log4j is, lucky you. I'm very jealous. Let me take you a little bit back to last Christmas. In the run-up to Christmas, there was an internet bug found in a really, really small and kind of obscure piece of logging software. It was open source software, so imagine like a bit like a Wikipedia, but for coding. So it's publicly maintained. And it's designed to essentially capture and record what's happening in pretty much any system that uses the coding language Java. And this little cartoon here in the middle is like, just shows you kind of the knock-on implications. Log4j is like that little tiny little pebble down the bottom that's like, it's not a commercial piece of software, but everybody uses it. And all of our software stacks are layered on this one piece of really vulnerable code. So when that vulnerability was disclosed, it was a race around the clock to try and patch our systems, remediate, reduce the blast radius. There was a huge, and again, obviously in the run-up to Christmas, right? So timing was a little bit tricky. We were looking at exploits that were being landed at one of the Mars probes. We were looking at kind of, huge, volumes, thousands and hundreds and thousands and millions of attack probes being launched at potentially vulnerable systems. But again, the really good news about it was that it was a really great example of how public and private sector, law enforcement, cyber intelligence agencies, cybersecurity analysts all collaborated. There was so much sharing, there was so much collaboration, there was so much kind of, interaction and kind of camaraderie around the community. And it was really, really heartening to see us all working as one with that common goal. And I think, that expression, like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I think that was a really, really great illustration of that. So in our theme of ecosystems for hope at MTL Connect, that was a kind of a hopeful moment that is good to reflect on. And I think, just on that kind of topic around education and also collaboration, one thing I think we all need to be aware of as well is, we are all citizens of the internet. And, if we think back to the philosophy, right, so Plato said the idea of justice was that you have a collective social consciousness that is striving for the collective good and to work in harmony. Now, Yanis Varoufakis, who's the former Greek economic minister and who I like to think is a modern-day Greek philosopher, he kind of calls the internet the equivalent now of the Athenian demos. It's our public square, right? It's where we interact as citizens of technology. And there's a question in my mind around whether we have kind of, or what level of kind of obligation, moral, ethical obligation we have, again, as individual citizens to behave and to question our behavior and to question the forces that are actually influencing us online. Many of those forces are commercially driven. So this quote kind of was very interesting. Netflix CEO said that the biggest competition for Netflix is not other video streaming services, it's us falling asleep. Netflix wants to keep us awake and it wants to keep us binging and it wants to keep us our eyes on the screen. We also saw Facebook have some fairly dubious ethical behavior in the last few years where they performed illegal mood manipulation experiments on us. So essentially they had a thesis that we might feel negative if we are served content with a particularly negative bias. Now, no major spoiler alert here. That's actually what happens, right? Looking at sad things makes us feel sad. And I think the examination of that particular incident, it gave a very stark reflection of how kind of these corporate powers have access to our psyches, our psychologies, our social beings, and yet we're not always aware of those sort of forces and how they interact with us. We've also seen, fairly major global events that have been, traced back to disruption and manipulation by certain commercial forces. So again, fascinating documentaries available on Cambridge Analytica's role in both Brexit and Donald Trump's election in the US. And I think with all of these, it really just kind of raises the question around, what can we do ourselves to keep aware of these forces and to keep kind of, to keep our own kind of mental health, shall we say, resilient, and the security of ourselves as individuals and also as a society, kind of front and center as we choose to interact online. There's that thing of going behind the Wizard of Oz's curtain. Understanding how the internet works, understanding why we're being served certain content, and that actually the types of content that generate often the most money are the ones that can be the most kind of damaging to us, both individually and collectively as a society. So with all that in mind, there's a great book by Mo Gadwat, the Egyptian mathematician. He wrote The Happiness Algorithm. And he talks about how, again, we should think of artificial intelligence and algorithms as our children, right? We should show them love. They're not seeing a lot of love right now. They're seeing a lot of the most negative traits of humanity. They're seeing a lot of kind of, quite toxic content, back to what happened to poor old Tay having to come offline. So, and there's also kind of, again, we're seeing those very real manifestations in our everyday world. So very sad news in the UK the other week where social media was deliberately cited in an inquest about the death of a teenage girl and kind of ruled culpable for her death. So I think with all of that in mind, we have to kind of decide, do we want to make a conscious philosophical choice about how we engage and turn every click that we make online into a positive click that's designed for the betterment of ourselves individually and also for us as a society. And I think that's a philosophy certainly that I would be delighted to ascribe to. So thank you so much for your time today. I will leave you with a little Dilbert cartoon because it's always a good way to end a presentation on. And just thank you very much again for your time. It's been a real pleasure to join you. I'll be speaking, I think, on a panel, Armand, later, and I'm happy to take questions. But also, if there are questions now, I'd be delighted to talk further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. That was really, really interesting and really relevant for what we're living as a society today. A little bit of inspiration, a little bit of warning signs, a little bit of everything. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming all the way from London to join us here in Montreal.
It's been really, really wonderful. Thank you.
Questions? I'm sure you must have a few. Oui, monsieur. There are 2 microphones, so you can please make your way to microphone 1 or microphone 2. Microphone 1 or microphone 2. Your name and your question.
Edward, so as most company has a digital presence through their website, there's a lot of thread that can go if they're not doing, any updates. So what would be your advice for a company to simply do those updates?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really valid question. And again, I think back to my point around sometimes companies need to be made to do this, right? There's a huge commercial pressure for people to move quickly, to deliver stuff quickly, and often security is a bit of an afterthought. What we're now seeing is more legislation that is demanding, again, that people keep their security controls up to date, particularly looking at online internet safety and international infrastructure. So we have an upcoming legislation, for instance, in the EU, the DORA Act, that's the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and that is now mandating that companies actually have to keep websites and critical infrastructure up to date and secure. And unfortunately, I kind of think unless they're made to, that commercial challenge will always mean that there are gaps, right? So I think we all have to do that. The other piece that's really important as well, a lot of companies now are offering bug bounty programs or responsible disclosure. So essentially, if you find a bug with their system, they'll reward you monetarily. And I think that's a really good philosophy. I think, again, if any of us do come across a vulnerability, it's kind of our prerogative always to go back to the company and let them know. They're not always happy to hear from you, but you might make a few bob.
Thank you.
Thanks, Edward.
And I'll say also here in Quebec with PL 64, le projet de loi 64, around consent of the user and asking companies to have a strong cybersecurity posture. That's going to help specifically in Quebec make the change. And I agree with you, Bronwyn, that without that force to change, people are like, we'll do whatever's the minimum amount required. Great question. Thank you so much. Any other questions in the audience? Yeah. I like it. Thank you, sir.
Sorry, I missed the first part of your talk, so maybe you address this. But can you talk a bit about, first off, Jeremy Clark, Concordia University. Can you talk a bit about social engineering and how, sort of the balance between technical attacks, how much resources are devoted to that, as opposed to, trying to stop fraud and sort of human vectors?
It's a great question, and the answer is it's nearly always the soft prod and the human errors. I mean, the technical exploits are very real and a concern, but it's nearly always the route in 90-odd% of the time. It will be social engineering, it will be phishing, it will be that prod. And I think there's been some very interesting recent examples. So the Lapsus attacks on Uber and Rockstar Games in the last few months, they were again just social engineering attacks where employees were being told, oh, hey, your multi-factor authentication prompt is expired. You need to, I'm your IT department. You need to kind of, you need to kind of reset. And so we're now seeing this sort of kind of security fatigue a little bit with people where, again, the controls that we've put in place to stop phishing are now being co-opted for phishing and social engineering. So it's a great question. I mean, our kind of ability to stop and take a pause and take a moment and to kind of validate what we're being asked to do and always check from another channel. I think that's our greatest defense in trying to kind of neutralize that threat.
Ask one follow-up. Can you talk a bit about those controls themselves? Like, if it's a technical attack, I can go to a vendor, they'll sell me a product that will protect me from it. But for that, it's more procedures and policies, and it's not a product that you can buy. So like, how do you put those controls in place?
You're absolutely right. You have to look at people, process, and technology, of course. And again, there's lots of kind of good stuff you can do in terms of segregation of duties around who can authorize password resets and who can actually kind of change authentication processes. All of that is really important. But again, I think if we always go back to that end user sitting by the computer, and that's for me the kind of the root, that's ground zero, right? If we get that right, there's so many different attack vectors that will be taken out of the equation. And the biggest one for me is, always verify something by another channel. So I'm getting a message from somebody saying, I'm your IT department. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to go and phone my IT department from a landline, right? And I'm going to, and if it's them, they'll talk me through it, right? I don't lose anything by that. But again, these criminals are so well thought into kind of putting us into this sense of urgency, into this mode of panic where we're like, oh crap, we've just got to do this or else, right? And it's actually taking that breath, taking that step back and kind of just going, right, you've told me this, I'm going to go and do my own thing via different channel. That breaking that chain can be very, very powerful.
Love it. Thank you so much for the question. We have time for maybe one more. Yes.
My question is towards the liability, towards the executive compared to the employee. So we renew our insurance for all crypto and attacks and everything. It has been multiplied by 20 compared to the last 5 years. So it has very increased. So my question is more, how do you perceive the liability compared to an employee that takes a password, for example, cat66, towards an executive? An executive has not a true management towards the selection of a password, even if we set it to 12 digits. Some people will still use their cat's name. Yeah. So my question is liability.
Again, very interesting, and you've hit on a number of really interesting touch points there. One is cyber insurance, and it is getting crazy expensive, right? Again, insurance companies are realizing, the losses, the impacts of these can be absolutely devastating, and particularly for an insurer where you may have multiple customers hit by the same incident, your whole viability of that offering is a little bit shaky. So they will look for any excuse to say, oh, well, sorry, you didn't have strong enough controls, or someone had a crap password, or whatever. And I think we need to be very mindful that, it's going to be harder and harder, I think, to kind of get that sense of comfort and trust that insurance companies will pay out. Again, please no disrespect intended to anybody from the insurance world here, but, it is a really challenging issue. The other problem as well is we've been seeing that they negate certain policies if they're seen as an act of war, right? So an example was the NotPetya attack in 2017. That had devastating results across the world. In the UK, the NHS was out of action for weeks. It was a really, really, really hard-hitting ransomware that just poofed around the world. It wasn't even intended to have that level of global disruption. And again, insurance companies said, well, it was originally coming from Russia. It was identified that it was looking to exploit Ukraine. That's an act of war. Therefore, that attack is not viable under this policy, right? So there's a lot of small print. Always read the small print. And I think, just be wary, I would say.
Thank you for the great question. I know we're running out of time.
Sorry.
I have one more question for you. That Neo4j graphic, I think, was so representative of a lot of the infrastructures that cybersecurity posture is built on. One little thing based on 1,000 other systems. With all the technological advancements, with blockchain technologies and these different disruptive technologies, do you think there's hope that we could one day have a more simple, unified system?
Wouldn't that be lovely? My short answer is probably no. I think, again, software is getting more and more complex, right? And they talk about kind of how many bugs you're likely to have per lines of code. And now we have systems with like huge swathes of code. And also, again, they're interacting in ways that, weren't necessarily anticipated. The use of APIs is a really big example, right? So you've got APIs that are now allowing public calling to systems, again, that were designed to be kept behind a perimeter. Yep. And I think, the short answer, I think it's something we need to strive for. I think simplicity is a wonderful kind of founding principle for all of us to live by. But I think we're probably going to get more complex before something drives us to be more simple.
I'm aiming for a feng shui.
Be zen with your software.
Well, again, first of all, amazing. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. Let's give her a big hand. Thank you so much for being here. And as Bronwyn mentioned, there's going to be a panel in about 15 minutes. Bronwyn's going to be a part of it, so please stay close. We're going to take a short 15 minutes break, and we will be back. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.